The winter of 1993 arrived colder than usual in Maple Hollow, a small town tucked away among the Vermont mountains, where everyone knew everyone by name, and any change in routine was enough to spark conversation in the bakery line. The streets were nearly deserted after 5 o'clock. The wind bit your face and the sound of falling snow was the only constant sound. It was in this scenario that Harold Madsen appeared at the market one day, head down, saying that Eleanor, his wife, had packed her bags and left after an argument. She couldn't handle life with me anymore, he said, with that harsh tone, leaving no room for questions, and no one dared doubt it. After all, Harold was a respected, hard-working man, always up at 6 in the morning, with his cement-calloused hands and the steady gaze of someone carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. But something didn't add up. Eleanor was the kind of woman who left her mark wherever she went. She taught at the local school, organized charity events, babysat the neighborhood children. To suddenly disappear like that without saying goodbye to anyone, without a letter, without a phone call, it didn't seem like her. Some neighbors whispered from their doorways, "Have you seen the way he's been lately? He seems more tense, talks less." Others said she must have met someone, wanted to start her life over somewhere else. It was easier to believe that than to imagine something worse, and oddly enough the police thought so too. They filed it all away as a simple marital abandonment. No body, no evidence, no reason to suspect Harold. The years passed, and the Madsen house grew increasingly silent. Harold maintained the same pattern. He would wake up early, go to work, return, lock the door and stay inside until the next day. Sometimes at night the neighbors would hear a strange sound coming from upstairs, as if something were slowly dragging across the floor, but they always thought it was the wind. When someone asked about Eleanor, he would sigh, feigning resignation. "She chose freedom, and I've learned to live with it." And over time the topic died, but the silence of that house seemed to scream. It was as if the walls held something no one wanted to discover. And this secret, locked away for 3 decades, was about to be exposed, by chance, by stubbornness, or perhaps simply because no truth stays buried forever. Some people hear this kind of story and turn the page, but those who have come this far feel differently. It gives them a knot in their chest, a desire to understand what really happened, to give a voice to those who have been silenced. It's these kinds of people who build this community, people who don't shy away from mystery, who shiver at every twist and turn, and who believe that some stories only find peace when they're told the right way. Here, each case is more than a crime. It's a scream trapped in time, waiting for someone willing to listen. So, come be a part of it. Hit the subscribe button, like, and help this story and so many others continue to be told until the end. Harold Madsen was never an easy man to understand. Those who grew up around him said he was the kind of person who didn't need to raise his voice to intimidate. All he had to do was look. He had a quiet manner, a heavy gaze, and a presence that filled a room even when he was silent. No one knew much about his past, only that he had served in Vietnam and returned changed, more withdrawn, colder. He worked as a bricklayer, always alone, and seemed to prefer the sound of a hammer to the sound of his own voice. Eleanor, however, was the complete opposite. A literature teacher at the local school, she had that natural glow of someone who saw beauty in the little things. She loved flowers, cats, and old books, and was the kind of person who remembered every student's name, even the rowdiest ones. She was sweet, but not naive. She had dreams, a desire to travel, to but these desires gradually faded when she married Harold. At first, the two seemed like an ordinary couple. He fixed the roof, she cooked dinner. People said that, despite their differences, they complemented each other. But those who looked closer realized there was something off about the way Harold spoke to her. He didn't yell, but he also left no room for opinion. He corrected every sentence, every gesture, as if she were a child needing to learn how to behave. Eleanor, little by little, began to change. She stopped wearing colorful dresses, avoided meeting friends, and began looking at the ground more often. People noticed, but preferred not to comment. After all, in a small town, no one likes to interfere in other people's marriages. Harold had a side only Eleanor knew. When he drank, and he drank almost every night, he became unpredictable. Sometimes he cried, remembering the war. Sometimes he talked to himself, and other times his silence was the most frightening. Eleanor slept lightly. Any sound would wake her. Sometimes she would hear the stairs creaking in the middle of the night, and when he entered the room, she would pretend to be asleep. Fear took up residence inside her, silently, like a shadow that wouldn't leave even during the day. The neighbors thought the couple lived an ordinary life. Harold would show up in the morning and wave, and at night the smell of cooking wafted from the kitchen. But behind the walls of that wooden house, the atmosphere was different. Eleanor no longer laughed. She would sit by the window for hours watching the snow fall, as if waiting for something that never came. Once, a friend from school came to visit her and noticed a bruise on her arm. When asked what had happened, Eleanor replied too quickly, "I tripped on the stairs." Her friend believed her, or pretended to believe her, and never mentioned the matter again. Over time, Harold began to control everything: her money, her trips to the grocery store, even her incoming letters. He told her the outside world was dangerous, that she should stay home, that no one understood her like he did. This kind of manipulation was so subtle that, little by little, Eleanor began to believe it. And that was precisely what made her disappear long before she truly disappeared. First from within, then from the world. Even so, there was something in Eleanor that resisted. She still wrote in her diary, hidden among her books, recording each day, each feeling, each moment of fear and hope. "He didn't speak to me today," she would write. "The house seems colder when he's here." They were short sentences, but filled with contained pain. No one knew, but that diary would be the only witness to what really happened inside that house. The few moments Harold showed affection were awkward, a compliment that felt like control, a gift given right after an argument. It was the classic cycle of abuse: a squeeze followed by relief, a wound followed by false care. Eleanor learned to read his every move, every look, like someone learning to read an enemy in silence. She knew when to breathe and when to stay quiet. She walked on eggshells, trying not to provoke what was always ready to explode. And the most frightening thing was how Harold maintained an impeccable image in front of others. He helped neighbors, mended fences, donated food at church functions. He was the good man on Maple Street. When Eleanor disappeared, no one wanted to believe he could have done anything. After all, what would such a helpful man gain from that? And it was precisely this reputation that protected him for so long. Some residents still remember a day, a few weeks before her disappearance, when Eleanor appeared at the town library with teary eyes and an envelope in her hands. She asked the librarian to keep the envelope and said, "If I don't come back, give it to my sister." But she returned that same day, took the envelope back, and was never seen again. Years later, no one knew what was inside. The truth is, behind the ordinary appearance of a stable marriage lay a story of fear, control, and silence. Harold Madsen wasn't just a lonely man scarred by war. He was someone carrying a secret too big to reveal, and Eleanor somehow knew it. She had already sensed something worse was coming. In the final weeks before her disappearance, neighbors reported hearing muffled screams in the early morning hours. Others claimed to have seen lights on in the attic, a place no one ever entered. Harold, when asked, always gave the same answer: "She's nervous. She needs some time alone." And so the story was swallowed up by time, as if the snow outside had the power to cover even what should not be forgotten. No one imagined at that moment that this apparent couple's quarrel would be just the beginning of one of the darkest secrets Vermont would ever see. Because no matter how hard Harold tried to cover his tracks, there were things that neither the cold nor time nor fear could hide for so long. It all started with something small, almost imperceptible, as happens in stories that only seem simple until you look more closely. It was a freezing January afternoon in 1993 when the neighbor across the street, Martha Collins, noticed something was different about the Madsens' routine. Eleanor's car had been in the same spot for days, covered in a thin layer of snow, and no lights had come on upstairs that night. At first, Martha thought the couple had gone out of town, but then she saw Harold on the porch, alone, with a distant look in his eyes and a cigarette burning between his fingers. When she asked about Eleanor, he responded with a half smile and a quick sentence. He left. He said he couldn't take it anymore. And that was it. As if a woman could simply disappear from a 10-year marriage overnight, without a suitcase, without a goodbye, without anything. The days passed, and small things began to attract attention. The mailman mentioned that Eleanor's mail had started being returned. The school where she taught received a letter, supposedly written by her, resigning, but the signature seemed strange, shaky, almost forced. A colleague even pointed out that the letter E wasn't the same as Eleanor's, but no one wanted to cause a fuss. After all, it was just a piece of paper, but sometimes a piece of paper can say more than 1,000 words. Harold, on the other hand, seemed too relaxed. In the first few months, he even tried to keep up appearances. He washed her clothes, tended the garden, and told different stories to each neighbor. To some, he said Eleanor had gone to California to start over. To others, he said she was with a younger man. And there were those to whom he told her she had mental problems, that one day she got tired and left without looking back. It was as if he were trying to bury the truth under so many versions that over time, even he began to believe them. But what no one realized was that, behind that calm facade, there were signs that didn't add up. In the wee hours of the morning, neighbors would hear noises coming from the attic, slow footsteps, shuffling objects, and sometimes a muffled sound, as if someone were crying softly. Harold always had a ready explanation. It's the rats. This house is old, and since everyone prefers a convenient lie to the uncomfortable truth, no one pressed the point. Even the police at the time, when called by a friend of Eleanor's concerned about her disappearance, saw no reason to investigate. They found the house clean, everything in order, no signs of a fight, nothing out of place. Harold repeated the story with such conviction it seemed rehearsed. She left. She got tired of me and I can't stop her. And in the final report, the case was classified as voluntary abandonment. But what no one knew was that inside that seemingly perfect house, one small detail was about to change everything. A few weeks later, Martha noticed something strange. Late in the afternoon, when the sun hit the attic window, she swore she saw a shadow move inside, as if someone were passing quickly in front of the curtain. But Harold always said the attic was empty, locked since the previous winter. Martha mentioned the incident to other neighbors, but they all laughed. It must be a reflection of the light, or her imagination. But she didn't forget, and it was this detail, this subtle movement that began to erode the tranquility of that neighborhood. Still, no one did anything. Life went on, the seasons changed, and Eleanor's disappearance became just another story people talked about in passing and quickly dismissed. Harold maintained his routine, steadfast, as if nothing had happened. But every now and then someone would see him leave in the early hours of the morning, go up to the attic, and stay there for hours. No one asked what he was doing there, but everyone would comment later in hushed tones, as if they knew something was wrong but preferred not to discuss it. It wasn't until years later, after Harold's death, that someone would re-enter that house and understand what was truly happening behind that poorly told story. But before that, there would be one last sign, one detail that would go unnoticed, and that, had it been noticed at the time, might have changed everything. Detective Lisa Warren wasn't the kind of person who believed in coincidences. Working for over 15 years in Vermont's cold case division, she'd learned that when something didn't make sense, it was because someone had lied very well at some point. Eleanor Madson's case came to her almost by chance, amid a pile of old reports and boxes of yellowed documents. The story seemed too simple. A woman disappears after a marital dispute, her husband claims she abandoned him, the police file it. The end. But Lisa had seen this kind of simplicity before, and she knew that when things seemed too easy to explain, that was precisely where the danger lay. She began rereading the 1993 report. No trace of a struggle, no witnesses to an assault, no concrete clues. But something bothered her. The patrol log of one of the officers who visited the house mentioned a strong odor coming from the upper floor. At the time, the explanation was clogged pipe due to the cold. Lisa couldn't accept that answer. It was a small, almost insignificant detail, but she knew that small details were like splinters. The more you tried to ignore them, the more they hurt. That's when she decided to do what no one had done in 30 years, revisit the scene. The Madsen house was now for sale. Harold had died months earlier, and the new owners, a young couple, were renovating the property. Lisa called, explained she was re-evaluating old cases, and asked permission to take a look. The couple, curious, agreed, and when she arrived, she found a house that seemed frozen in time. The walls were covered in faded wallpaper, the smell of mold and old wood, and a strange feeling that the air was heavier than it should be. As she climbed the stairs, Lisa noticed a detail that made her pause, a slight difference in the color of the ceiling. just above the hallway leading to the bedrooms. It was as if someone had painted that area more than once, trying to hide something. She brought the flashlight closer and noticed small, spaced, circular marks, as if someone had nailed something there. Why would someone nail the ceiling? She thought. Upstairs, the attic was closed. The lock was old, but it had been reinforced with modern screws. The detective stood there for a few seconds, feeling a chill run down her spine. Back at the office, Lisa began connecting the dots. She searched Eleanor's bank transaction history. No activity since her disappearance, no travel records, no passports, no new identities. It was as if she had vanished from the face of the earth. And the strangest thing, all the couple's bills and debts were paid promptly by Harold until the day he died. He lived alone with no family, no close friends, and yet he never left the house. He never moved, never sold anything. He lived trapped there, in that same structure, as if he were harboring something he couldn't leave behind. Lisa also revisited old accounts. Her neighbor Martha, now in her 70s, still remembered the noises in the attic. "I know what I heard," she said, her voice trembling. "That house was alive. Up there. Sometimes it sounded like someone was moving slowly, sometimes they were crying." The detective wrote down every word. It wasn't much, but it was enough to rekindle an old doubt. From then on, Lisa dove into the investigation with the obstinacy of someone who senses something is about to be revealed. She returned to the archives of the school where Eleanor worked, found the suspicious resignation letter, and sent it for forensic analysis. The result came back 2 days later. Though the signature wasn't authentic, someone had imitated her handwriting and badly. That was enough for Lisa to request the formal reopening of the case, but the department refused. 30 years ago, nobody found anything. "We're not going to waste resources on a cold case," her boss said. The refusal only strengthened her determination. Lisa began working on her own, reviewing schedules, routes, reports, and even phone records from 1993. She discovered that Harold had made 3 mysterious calls the night he disappeared, all to the same number, a hardware store. The next morning, the receipt showed the purchase of boards, nails, and soundproofing. Coincidence? Perhaps. But Lisa knew there was no such thing as coincidence when fear was involved. The following week, she returned to the house, this time with a simple excuse: to photograph the structure for the county historical archives. The couple allowed it, and while taking the photos, she noticed another detail. The attic had no external ventilation, no ducts, no windows, nothing. It was a completely isolated room, the kind of place where time could pass without leaving a trace. That night, Lisa couldn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling, remembering her own childhood, her mother, trapped in an abusive relationship for years, and the day she herself called the police for help. No one came. The memory was accompanied by a bitter taste, the same one she felt every time she found a forgotten woman in the files, a name erased through neglect. That was why that case affected her so much. Eleanor wasn't just a victim. She was the reflection of all the voices the system ignored. Over the next few days, Lisa compiled a detailed map of the house based on contemporary records. There was a difference in square footage between the original plan and the current one, about 2 square meters lost upstairs, the exact space that could hide a secret compartment. And that's when it hit her. The soundproofing, the purchased floorboards, the locked attic. Everything pointed to the same place. She knew she needed a warrant to open the area, but without the department's support, that was impossible. So she decided to act within the bounds of the law, and perhaps a little beyond. She returned to the house with a material detector and discreetly scanned the walls. The device revealed a difference in the density of the wood in one specific spot, as if there were a closed compartment behind it. Her heart raced. She felt like she was inches away from a truth buried for decades. When the sweep was finished, Lisa walked downstairs in silence. The couple asked if she'd found anything, and she simply smiled. Nothing conclusive yet, but inside, something burned. That kind of intuition that's no longer logical, almost instinctive. She knew Eleanor was there. Not alive, perhaps, but present. The walls of that house carried a history that didn't want to remain hidden. That night, as she reviewed her notes, Lisa looked at an old photo of the Madsons. He had his arm around her. She was smiling, but her look wasn't smiling. It was the look of someone who knew too much, of someone who was already trapped and still hadn't fully understood. Lisa ran her fingers over the photo and whispered, "I'll find you, Eleanor, whatever it takes." But what Lisa didn't yet know was that, as she tried to piece together the puzzle of that disappearance, Harold's past held something even darker, something that explained not only where Eleanor was, but also why no one had noticed before. And that discovery, when it came to light, wouldn't let anyone sleep easy in Maple Hollow. When Lisa presented her findings to the department, the reaction was anything but encouraging. Captain Rogers, a skeptical and pragmatic man known for burying old cases faster than new reports, listened silently for a few minutes and then let out an impatient sigh. "Lisa, it's been 30 years. No physical evidence, no living witnesses, nothing to justify reopening this. You're seeing ghosts." The detective maintained her composure, but inside she felt a mixture of anger and frustration. It was always like this. Every time a woman disappeared, the system found an excuse not to look properly, and when anyone tried to do so later, it was too late. "Captain, there are inconsistencies in the original report, falsified documents, witnesses whose accounts were ignored. That's enough to warrant a new search," he insisted. Rogers shook his head, leaning back in his chair. "The husband is dead. The case is closed. We're not going to waste time or money on an old story of abandonment. Unless you have a body, this case doesn't exist." Lisa left the room, her blood boiling. She felt she was one step away from something, but that step seemed impossible. The lack of institutional support was a wall, but she had already learned to climb it alone. She returned to the car and stood there for a few minutes, staring into space, until a thought crossed her mind. If the system didn't want to listen, she would act the way she always had, on her own. Over the next few weeks, she continued her investigation in silence. She reviewed the house plans again, compared them with the renovation documents, and noticed a strange pattern. There were invoices for building materials purchased by Harold on dates that coincided with his disappearance. Nails, boards, soundproofing, caulk, everything used inside the house, but no renovations were officially recorded. What was he building or hiding, she wondered. Meanwhile, the authorities' disinterest only grew. Rogers even called her in for a private conversation, trying to convince her to drop the case. "You have a good track record here, Lisa. Don't ruin your career over a cold case. Her husband already paid the price. He died alone, forgotten. That's enough." But she knew it wasn't enough. Eleanor had no voice, and the silence of that house still screamed for justice. With each new clue, Lisa felt she was getting closer to the truth, but also isolating herself from everyone. Her classmates began to avoid her in the hallways. Some whispered that she was obsessed. Others said she was projecting personal traumas. And maybe they were right. Maybe she really was. But unlike them, Lisa knew that some stories need to be heard, even when no one wants to hear them. One morning, after yet another unsuccessful meeting, she received an anonymous email titled, "You're not wrong." Inside was a single sentence. "Search the construction company's records for 1992. The IP address was masked, the sender non-existent." Lisa was intrigued. She followed the lead and found something that chilled her blood. The year before his disappearance, Harold had requested a private project to install an internal compartment, a space that, according to the document, should be acoustic-sealed, isolated, and without external access. The project was commissioned by a local company, but the engineer in charge had been dead for years. When she brought this information to the captain, hoping he would now have grounds to act, the response was a cold shower. "Lisa, you're digging yourself a hole. This kind of evidence is useless without a warrant, and you won't get one based on this. I'm giving you some advice. Drop this case." He spoke with an almost paternal calm, but to Lisa it sounded condescending, the kind of tone that always came with disbelief. She stood up, looked him straight in the eye and said, "Captain, a man who spends his entire life sleeping meters from where he committed a crime is not a cold case. He's a living secret, and he's about to be discovered." She left the room without waiting for an answer, knowing that from then on she would be alone. In the following days, she began to feel the emotional weight of loneliness. She slept poorly, with recurring nightmares in which she heard faint knocking, as if coming from within the walls. She dreamed of a woman calling her name, whispering, "Don't leave me here." She woke sweating with the feeling of being watched. Even so, she remained steadfast. One night, after reviewing photos of the house for the 100th time, Lisa noticed something she'd never noticed before. In one of the hallway photos, The baseboard appeared slightly higher on a particular wall. She measured it and noticed a difference of just 2 centimeters, enough to conceal a hollow space. The next morning, she returned to the house under the pretense of checking for old leaks. The couple who owned it were already starting to think she was strange, but they let her in. As she walked down the hallway, the wind whistling outside and the floor creaking beneath her feet, Lisa ran her hand along the wall and tapped lightly. The sound wasn't the same throughout. At one point, there was a muffled echo, as if air were behind the wood. It was there. She pressed her ear against it, and was silent. Nothing. No sound. No breathing, just the cold. But that silence carried a weight. It was the same kind of silence that precedes discovery, and she knew it. She left without saying anything, but her head was boiling. She already had enough to request a new search warrant, even if it was based on the claim of structural risk. And that's what she did. But before she could file the request, she received an unexpected call from Rogers himself. "Lisa, stop this. I don't want your name on this lawsuit. Enough is enough." His voice sounded tense, different. It was the first time she sensed fear in him. "Captain, what's going on?" "Some things are better left in the past," he replied, and hung up. That night, Lisa sat alone in her office, looking at her notes, trying to understand why her boss seemed so nervous. Then something occurred to her. The 1993 report had been signed not only by Harold, but also by Rogers, who at the time was the officer responsible for the first inspection of the house. And in that report, the detail about the strong smell upstairs had been deleted in the final version. Someone had covered up the mistake from the beginning. The shock was immediate. Lisa leaned back in her chair, taking a deep breath. Now everything made sense. The department's disinterest, the refusal to reopen the case, the captain's own fear. It wasn't just negligence, it was guilt. And if Rogers had something to hide, any advance from her would mean unearthing his past as well. But it was too late to turn back. Her instincts told her that what he was about to uncover went far beyond a simple police omission, because in truth, that case had never been forgotten. It had only been buried. And what was buried in that house, and perhaps in the consciousness of more people, was about to come to light in a way no one could stop. The next morning, after a sleepless night, Lisa made a decision that would completely change the course of the investigation and her own life. If no one would help her, she would do it. Herself. And it wouldn't be the first time. She had already dealt with too much bureaucracy, too many empty promises, with the kind of authority that says, "We'll see," but never sees anything. But this time was different. This time, Eleanor Madson's story wasn't just a name on paper. She was a woman who vanished without a trace, and whose absence still echoed in every wall of that house. And the more Lisa thought about it, the more certainty grew within her. What Harold had done was there, hidden, waiting to be found. That same day, she left the department without warning, carrying a backpack and the house key the owners had left with her for future inspections. The sky was cloudy, the snow was beginning to melt, and the ground was a mix of mud and dead leaves. When she arrived, she stood outside for a few seconds, observing the silent house as if facing an ancient enemy. It was strange to think that, behind those windows, someone had lived for 30 years, hiding something the entire world believed had been resolved. She walked slowly up the porch, opened the door and stepped inside. The air was heavy, smelling of damp wood and dust. Each step made the floor creak, and it felt like the house was watching back. He went straight to the attic. The stairs leading up were narrow and slanted, and the wood cracked under the weight. Upon arriving, he found the door locked again, only this time he'd brought what he needed. Using a screwdriver and a crowbar, he began removing the screws one by one. With each click, the sound seemed to echo throughout the house. Her heart raced. As she worked, she remembered her conversations with Rogers, his coldness, his excuses. The thought hurt. How many Eleanors were left behind because of this? She whispered to herself. When she finally removed the last screw, she pushed the door hard. The creak was long and sharp, almost a pent-up scream. The hallway light partially illuminated the interior, and what she saw first was dust. So much dust, and an old sweet sour smell like something kept too long. The space looked untouched for decades. There was a chair against the wall, a small table, and what appeared to be an old blanket thrown in the corner. But something stood out. The back wall had a different color, as if it had been patched. Lisa approached, shined her flashlight, and saw small, spaced, vertical marks. Nails. He closed this, she thought. He closed this with her inside. Her stomach churned. She took a step back, trying to contain her panic. She needed proof. She pulled out her phone and started filming. Her voice was shaky but firm. Recording from the attic of the Madsen house. Disturbed structure. Visible seal marks. She touched the wall with her knuckles. The sound was hollow. Behind it, there was space. A small space, but enough to hide something, or someone. Lisa took a deep breath and pulled a small hammer from her pocket. With her other hand, she held the flashlight. She struck the first blow. The wood cracked. The second made the echo louder. The third, a piece broke off, and the air that escaped was thick, heavy, as if carrying the weight of 30 years of silence. She choked on the smell. Oh my God! And it was at that moment that a noise downstairs made her freeze. A sharp crack, as if someone had opened the front door. She held her breath. Waited. Nothing. The sound repeated, softer this time, and her heart began to race. Someone's here. He walked to the stairs, hammer in hand, and heard slow footsteps ascending. "Who's there?" he asked. No answer, just the sound of wood giving way. The tension was so intense that the air seemed to vibrate. Then, from the shadows, a familiar voice echoed, "Lisa!" It was Captain Rogers. He appeared in the shadows, panting, sweating. "What are you doing here?" he asked, looking around with a mixture of anger and fear. "I should ask you the same thing, Captain." He looked away, taking a deep breath. "You don't understand. What you're stirring up. There are things that need to stay buried." Lisa took a step forward. "Buried or hidden?" He was silent for a moment, then ran his hand over his face and murmured, "Back then, I was young, a rookie. The boss ordered the case closed. He said her husband was influential, that it was best not to investigate. I just obeyed." His voice cracked, as if carrying a regret too old to bear. "Eleanor was alive when we went there, wasn't she?" Lisa asked, looking intently. He hesitated. "I don't know. Maybe. But Harold begged them not to open the attic. He said she was sick, that she needed rest. And the boss told them to leave it alone." The silence that followed was heavier than any scream. Lisa closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of those words. 30 years, Rogers. 30 years to do the right thing. He didn't answer. He just looked at the wall she'd begun to break down and said softly, "You don't want to see what's in there." But Lisa wanted it, needed it. It didn't matter what was behind it anymore. She had already passed the point of no return. She walked to the wall again, ignoring his pleas, and raised the hammer. Rogers took a step back, his expression one of knowing what was coming. "Lisa, please." She knocked again. The wood split open further. The flashlight beam penetrated the crack and revealed the interior. She couldn't see clearly, but there was something inside, something wrapped in faded fabric, frozen in time. Her hands trembled. The air seemed to vanish. For a moment the silence was absolute, and in that instant she knew everything she suspected was about to be confirmed. But what she didn't yet know, what no one knew, was that this discovery would reveal not only Eleanor's fate, but also the darkest secret Maple Hollow had ever tried to hide. That night remained etched in Lisa's memory as a blur of sounds, smells, and images that seemed to blend between dream and nightmare. After breaking part of the wall, the piece of wood fell away, revealing a space so narrow it was barely large enough for a person to sit. The air that escaped was thick, almost palpable, and carried a damp odor mixed with something else, the kind of smell you never forget once you smell it. Lisa gripped the flashlight tightly and pointed it inside. The light trembled with her hands. In the corner, a rusty chair sat bolted to the floor with old chains and a rope that looked hastily cut. On the floor lay a piece of floral fabric, faded but still recognizable. It was the same pattern as the dress Eleanor wore in one of the family photos Lisa had seen in the archives. For a moment, she stood completely still. Her heart pounded so hard it seemed to fill the silence. Rogers, standing in the doorway, watched silently, his face pale and his eyes wide. "My God," was all he could say. Lisa bent down and noticed beside the chair a small notebook covered in dust and mold. She touched it carefully, and the pages crumbled slightly as she opened them. The writing was small, shaky, but legible. "He said the world has forgotten me. that no one will look for me, that if I scream, no one will hear. Lisa swallowed hard. This wasn't just proof. It was a scream trapped in time, a silent confession of pain. She stood, notebook in hand, and looked at Rogers. "You knew," she said quietly, her eyes never leaving his. The captain hesitated, took a deep breath, and replied, "I suspected, but there was no way to prove it, and when I came back here years ago, the attic was already sealed. I thought it best to leave it that way." Lisa stepped forward. "Better for whom, Captain?" "For her." He lowered his head, unable to answer. As they argued, a noise outside interrupted the moment. Footsteps. Someone walking in the snow-covered yard. Lisa instinctively turned off the flashlight and moved to the window, peering carefully. She saw the shadow of a man, or maybe two, standing near the fence. "There are people out." "There?" she whispered. Rogers went to the stairs, trying to see but saw no one. "They must be curious. This story got out," he said, but his tone wasn't convinced. Lisa tucked the diary into her jacket pocket, still unable to fully process what she'd just found. Every word in Eleanor's notebook seemed to vibrate in her mind, as if that woman, even decades dead, was still trying to speak. "He said he'll leave me here until I forget who I am. Today he came up again, brought cold food. The noise of the neighbors is the only thing that reminds me there's still life out there." The pages were short, but they cut deep. As they descended the stairs, Rogers looked shaken. "This is going to destroy a lot of people, Lisa. You don't understand what you're getting into." She stopped halfway down the stairs and looked at him sternly. "I'm not here to protect reputations. I'm here to name the silence. And you should do the same." He looked away, visibly overcome with guilt. In the kitchen, Lisa picked up her cell phone and called dispatch, reporting that she had found evidence of a crime. But before she could finish, the call dropped. No signal. The house was old, surrounded by hills, the kind of place where the phone rarely worked properly. Rogers approached and said, "Let's get out of here, take what we have and come back tomorrow with backup." But Lisa didn't want to leave. She sensed there was more. There was something in those walls, something that hadn't yet been revealed. It was then that she noticed a small hatch in the attic floor, just behind the broken wall. A wooden lid, barely visible beneath the accumulated dust. She bent down, wiped the surface, and realized there was a padlock, now rusted. "What's that?" she asked. Rogers looked and paled. "I've never seen that before." Lisa grabbed the crowbar and tried to pry the padlock. With a sharp snap, it broke. When she lifted the lid, the smell that came from below was unbearable. She shone her flashlight into the hole. Below, a small space no more than a meter high, filled with old boxes and scraps of fabric. And then, amid the rubble, something metallic gleamed. Lisa crawled and pulled out the object, an iron frame with a rusted label, Madsen Construction 1992. "He used his own company to hide this," she murmured. Rogers stood still, watching. "Lisa, let's go, now." But she couldn't stop. Every detail of that house was a piece of a terrible puzzle. She picked up one of the boxes and opened it. Inside were personal items, a pair of women's shoes, a hairbrush, a letter never sent. The addressee was Margaret Lewis, Eleanor's sister, who disappeared months after her. The envelope was sealed, but the date stamp was 1994. Lisa felt her stomach churn. "She tried to call for help," she whispered. Suddenly, a loud sound echoed outside, an engine starting. Lisa ran to the window and saw headlights illuminating the front of the house. Someone had arrived. Rogers cursed. "It can't be a Thai journalist. No one knows we're here." The lights remained still for a few seconds, then went out. Silence returned, but this time it felt different, charged, tense, alive. Lisa knew they were being watched. The way the wind blew against the windows, the creaking of the wood, everything seemed more intense. She clutched Eleanor's diary tightly, as if it were a shield. "Captain, if we leave now, it might be too late." He hesitated, looked around, and murmured, "Too late for who, Lisa?" And it was in that moment, between fear and certainty, that she understood she hadn't seen everything yet. There was something in that house, something Harold Madsen had left behind, not out of carelessness, but intention. And what she would find there, hidden within those walls between the silence and the guilt, would completely change the course of that investigation and show that the true horror of Maple Hollow was still far from being revealed. That early morning, the cold seemed to slice the air into pieces. The house, shrouded in fog, creaked with every gust of wind as if breathing. Lisa and Rogers remained silent for a few minutes, trying to comprehend what they had just seen, and more importantly, what remained to be discovered. The presence outside seemed to have vanished, but the tension inside the house remained, dense, almost visible. Lisa felt that time was against her, and that the real enemy was not the cold nor fear, but the truth that was about to emerge from the darkness. She turned her gaze to Rogers, who remained motionless, staring at the hole in the ground. He seemed distant, his gaze lost, and for the first time, she saw the captain not as an authority figure, but as a broken man, consumed by guilt. "How many cases like this have you closed, Rogers?" she asked quietly. Not anger, but something deeper. Disappointment. He took a while to answer. "More than I'd like to admit, but none haunt me like this one. When I saw the look in her eyes that night, I knew. Something was wrong. I just didn't have the courage to go back." Lisa took a deep breath, trying to contain the anger that rose like a lump in her throat. She stood there, on the other side of that wall, waiting for someone to do the bare minimum, and no one did. Rogers ran a hand over his face wearily and murmured, "I thought he'd just locked her up and let her out. I never imagined it would go this far." She looked at him in disbelief. You thought so, while she rotted in. There. The silence that followed was broken by a sharp crack from upstairs. They both instinctively looked up at the ceiling. Another sound, a slow creak, as if something were moving up there. Rogers reached for his gun, but Lisa stopped him. "It's not people. It's the wind." Still, the noise continued. Heavy, shuffling footsteps, moving back and forth. The detective swallowed. "This house is alive," she thought, and for a moment doubted her own reasoning. Perhaps the weight of it all was messing with her mind. But the sound suddenly stopped. The silence returned, and it was even worse. Lisa knew she had to get out of there, but a part of her refused to leave without understanding everything. She picked up Eleanor's diary again, leafing through it carefully. The last pages were almost illegible, written in smudged ink and shaky handwriting. "He's back upstairs. He said he won't let me leave, that no one believes a woman who cries." The last entry, however, was different. The letters were bold, and the sentence ended abruptly. "Today I heard another voice." Lisa frowned. "Another voice?" she repeated softly. She wasn't alone. Rogers looked at her, confused. "What do you mean?" Lisa showed the page. She wrote that at the end. She heard another voice. It wasn't just Harold. There was someone else here. The captain shook his head. "It can't be. He lived alone." Lisa put the diary away and replied, "It's not always what it seems." She descended into the basement, determined to investigate further. The space was dark and narrow, filled with old tools and dust-covered boxes. She slowly passed the flashlight over the shelves and noticed a brick wall with irregular marks, as if it had been opened and closed several times. "Here," he murmured. He touched one of the bricks and found it moved easily. He removed a few, revealing a small cavity. Inside was a plastic envelope with old photos. Opening it, she saw something that made her freeze. Harold Madsen, standing next to an unknown man, both smiling in front of the house, and on the back of one of the photos the inscription, "Our Project, 1992. Project, Lisa thought. She turned to Rogers, who was watching from a distance. "Do you recognize this man?" He walked over, picked up the photo and paled. "That's Sheriff Wallace, my old boss." Lisa felt her entire body go cold. "The same one who ordered the case closed?" Rogers nodded, his voice almost cracking. "He and Harold were close. I never connected the dots." The air seemed to drain from the room. Lisa looked at the photo again, and suddenly everything began to make sense. The soundproofing, the rush to close the case, Rogers's fear, everyone's silence. This wasn't just a domestic crime. It was a conspiracy of convenience, a network of men protecting each other while a woman rotted locked in the attic. The impact of the discovery was devastating. Lisa had to lean against the wall to keep her balance. Rogers, his hands trembling, shook his head. My God, he knew. The sheriff knew all along. Lisa looked at him with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "And you should have known too. You just chose not to see it." Suddenly, a metallic sound came from the entrance, the doorknob moving. They both froze. Lisa turned off the flashlight and fell silent. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. Someone was inside. The basement door opened slowly, and the beam of a flashlight fell down the steps. Lisa and Rogers hid behind a bookshelf. A man entered, tall in a dark jacket, and began searching the space. He didn't say anything, but the way he moved showed he knew exactly where he was going. Lisa looked at Rogers and whispered, "Who is he?" The captain replied in a whispered voice, "I don't know." The intruder walked to the newly opened wall, took the envelope containing the photos, and put it in his pocket. Then he looked around and walked slowly upstairs, leaving the door open behind him. They waited a few seconds before emerging from hiding. "This is no coincidence," Lisa said. "Someone is still trying to erase what's left of this story." Rogers nodded, visibly shaken, "And whoever it is still has the power to do so." Lisa took a deep breath, grabbed Eleanor's diary, and the remaining pages of the photos she'd managed to save. "They can erase evidence, but they can't erase what happened here, and now I know who to look for." Rogers tried to stop her, but she was already heading for the door. "Lisa, don't do this alone." She paused for a second and replied without looking back, "That's how it all started, when someone chose to do nothing. I won't repeat that mistake." And she stepped out into the cold night, flashlight in one hand and Eleanor's diary in the other. The wind bit her face, and the cloud-laden sky seemed to announce that something much bigger was about to happen. The past was beginning to shift, and what Lisa would uncover in the coming days would prove that Eleanor Madson's story wasn't just an old case, but a living scar on the entire city, a wound that was finally beginning to bleed again. The sun had barely risen when Lisa parked the car in front of the old county police station. Her face was pale, her eyes sunken, her body tired, but her mind was buzzing. The previous night still echoed inside her like an unceasing hum, the smell of old wood, the sound of the wall cracking, the words in Eleanor's diary. None of it felt real, yet everything he found was more real than any official report or version. She had proof now, a diary, photos, and the certainty that this case went far beyond an abusive husband. There was a web of silence that spanned 3 decades, and she was at the center of it. She entered the building with determination, the same old smell of stale coffee and damp paper. Some colleagues looked up and whispered, others looked away. She knew what they were thinking, that she'd lost control, that she was obsessed. Rogers was already there, sitting at the conference room table, his face serious and his hands clasped. Across from him was a man Lisa didn't recognize. Dark suit, cold expression. "Lisa Warren," the man said, standing up. "I'm Federal Agent Miller. I've been assigned to oversee the re-evaluation of the Madsen case. We've received some reports." She looked directly at Rogers, who looked away. "You told them. They already knew," he replied hesitantly. "And I thought it best." "Better what? Hand over everything before I open my mouth?" Lisa interrupted. Miller kept his tone neutral. "Detective, what you have in your hands is serious. Accusations like this require protocol, and if what you say is true, the involvement of officials at the time needs to be carefully investigated." Lisa crossed her arms. "Carefully? Eleanor was locked in an attic for 30 years while you called it caution." The agent kept his gaze fixed on her, impassive. "No one here wants to cover anything up, but acting without a warrant could jeopardize the entire case, and frankly, your history of insubordination doesn't help." Lisa felt her blood rise. "My history of insubordination is why Eleanor can finally have a name on her grave." The atmosphere in the room grew tense. Rogers cleared his throat, trying to lighten the situation, but the tension was palpable. After a few minutes, Miller asked to see the evidence. Lisa placed Eleanor's diary on the table, along with the photos she'd managed to save before the intruder took them. He examined everything coolly, without apparent reaction. "These photos are serious. If they're authentic, it could implicate authorities still alive." She leaned forward. "They're authentic. And the man next to Harold is Sheriff Wallace, the same one who filed the case." The agent jotted something down on his pad and stood. "We'll need more than that. I want you to know that from now on, everything goes through me. No movement without authorization. And for now, you're temporarily removed." The sentence landed like a blow. Lisa gave a bitter laugh. "Removed for uncovering the truth, for breaking a warrant and acting outside the law," he corrected. Rogers tried to intervene, but she was already on her feet. "You can remove me from office, but not from the truth, and it doesn't need a badge to exist." She left the room and felt the cold air hit her face. Outside, the day began grey with low clouds, the kind of weather that makes the city seem suspended in time. In the parking lot, she leaned against her car and stood there, breathing deeply, trying not to collapse. She felt like she was fighting something much bigger than an old crime. It was a concrete wall, built by decades of silence and convenience, and the more she knocked, the more she discovered how deep the structure ran. Suddenly, her cell phone vibrated, an unknown number. She answered hesitantly. The voice on the other end was low, shaky. "Detective Warren? This is Margaret Lewis." Lisa's heart raced. "Margaret, Eleanor's sister?" "Yes. I heard they reopened the case. I never stopped looking, never." Her voice trembled, but it was firm. "And I know who else was in that house." Lisa straightened, the chill in her chest fading. "You need to tell me everything. Where is it?" "I can't talk on the phone. People have been watching me for years, but there's something he left behind. Something that proves what they did. It's buried on the property, near the shed." Before Lisa could respond, the line dropped. She stood there, the phone still to her ear, her heart pounding. Margaret was alive, and apparently she knew more than anyone. She ran to her car, started the engine, and drove off without thinking. Rogers tried to call her, but she was already far away. As he drove through the narrow, snow-covered roads, his mind raced. Buried near the shed, the words echoed. Arriving at the old Madsen property, the place was deserted. The police hadn't yet cordoned off the area, and the rusty gate creaked. As she pushed, she walked through the tall grass, following the path to the old shed in the back, the same one where, according to records, Harold had kept tools. The wood was rotten, the roof partially collapsed. Inside, the air was damp, and the smell of rust permeated. In the corner, a broken concrete floor stood out. It looked patched, as if someone had tried to hide something. Lisa knelt, ran her hand over the surface, and felt the uneven texture. She picked up an old tool and began digging. The sound of metal hitting the ground echoed in the silence. After a few minutes, the iron struck something hard, a hollow sound. She dug faster, her heart racing. When she finally brushed away the dirt, she found a rusty metal box, locked with a padlock. She forced it until it broke. Inside were papers, photographs, and a cassette tape. She carefully picked it up and brushed off the dust. The label read by hand, "Confession, 1994. Goosebumps ran down Lisa's spine. He packed everything into his backpack and looked around, feeling the wind rushing through the warehouse. The city seemed still, the whole world silent. This was too big to be just an old case. But as she walked out, something made her stomach turn. There were fresh footprints in the snow right behind her, and they weren't hers. She stopped, turned slowly, and saw, in the distance, a silhouette standing on the side of the road, watching, very still, very motionless. Her heart pounded. Lisa stood there, unsure, whether to run or face it. But one thing was certain: whoever it was knew exactly what she had just encountered, and perhaps in that moment, the truth she had so desperately sought would begin to take its toll. Lisa's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her head. The figure standing in the distance didn't move, didn't speak, just watched. The wind lifted the snow from the ground, and for a moment she thought it might just be a play of light, a shadow cast by a car's headlights. But then the silhouette took a step, slow, precise, human. She swallowed hard, her muscles tense, her breath shallow. Her hand instinctively went to her holster, but the gun was still in the car. Damn. She looked around. The shed, the tall grass, the crumbling fence. There was nowhere to run without being seen. The figure took another step. Now the dawn light revealed more defined features. A tall man in a dark overcoat, his hood partially covering his face. Lisa stepped back, clutching the backpack, containing the evidence tightly. The man stopped a few feet away, his breath rising into the frigid air. For a moment, they just stared at each other, the silence broken only by the rustling of the wind. Then he spoke, a deep, worn voice, as if coming from far away. "I knew someone would find it." Lisa narrowed her eyes. "Who are you?" He didn't answer right away. He just smiled at the corner of his mouth, a smile that felt more like a warning. "You should have left it where it was. These stories weren't meant to be retold." Lisa took a step forward, fear mingling with anger. These stories are about people, not secrets, and if you had anything to do with what happened here, you'll tell me now." The man let out a short laugh. "Do you really think you'll be able to understand what happened? You have no idea what this town has covered up." He took a step toward her, and Lisa instinctively took 2 steps back. The shed behind her creaked in the wind. She tried to keep her gaze steady, but her mind was spinning. This was beyond anything she'd expected. "Who sent you here? Sheriff Wallace?" The smile faded. The man looked up, and even in the dim light, Lisa could see the cold gleam in his eyes. "Wallace is dead, a long time ago, but not everything died with him." He moved closer, and Lisa raised her flashlight like a weapon. "Stay where you are," he shouted. The man stopped. "You found the tape, didn't you?" She hesitated, the silence betraying her. "I know what Harold did," he continued, "but you have no idea what we recorded on that tape. What we heard." Lisa felt a shiver run down her spine. What was on that recording? A confession, yes, but not from Harold. He wasn't alone. Wallace was there too, and someone else. A third man. They didn't arrest Eleanor out of anger alone. They needed her to keep quiet. Her breath caught. Quiet about what? He gave a half smile, turned his back, and simply said, "Listen to the tape, but be prepared to understand what they've hidden." Before she could react, the man vanished into the mist as if he'd dissolved into thin air. Lisa ran to the gate but saw no one, only footprints leading down to the road and disappearing there. Heart still racing, he got into his car and started the engine. His hands trembled as he inserted the cassette tape into an old recorder he always kept in the glove compartment, a relic he used to archive interviews. He pressed play. The initial hiss filled the silence, and then a male voice began to speak. The voice belonged to Harold Madsen. She screamed at first, then she stopped. "Wallace said he would fix it, that no one would suspect. I just did what he told me." Pause. Another hiss. Another voice. Firmer. Colder. "This isn't going anywhere. If she talks, we're all dead." Lisa felt a chill run through her. The tape continued, interspersed with disjointed phrases, noises, and muffled sobs. At a certain point, a third voice, almost whispered, appeared. A female voice. Weak, trembling. "Please, don't leave me here." And the sound stopped. Silence. A click. End of recording. She stood there, motionless, listening to the echo of her own heartbeat. Eleanor's voice. The proof no one ever wanted to hear. She picked up the phone and tried to call Rogers, but he didn't answer. She called again. Nothing. Then she glanced in the rearview mirror and saw something that made her blood run cold. A car parked about 50 yards behind, its headlights off. The same black car she'd seen parked at the police station earlier. "It can't be a coincidence," she muttered. Her stomach churned. She put the tape away and started the car. As she pulled out, the car behind her did the same. Her hands were sweating on the steering wheel. Okay, so that's how it's going to be. She accelerated, trying to lose the car, cutting through the narrow roads between the trees. The other car followed, keeping its distance, not passing. It was a silent, calculated pursuit. Lisa took a deep breath, trying to reason. If this became public, if she could prove Wallace's involvement and whoever else was behind it, it wouldn't just be a solved case. It would be a scandal capable of ruining careers, entire families, perhaps even the entire city's image. That was exactly why they were trying to stop her. After a few miles, she made a sharp turn and turned off her headlights, hiding the car behind an old barn. She waited. The other vehicle passed straight past, disappearing into the fog. She stood there for long minutes, breathing deeply, feeling her whole body tremble. She picked up the tape again and stared at it, as if the small object weighed enough to crush the world. It all started with a missing woman, she thought, but it wasn't just her. Eleanor had been the beginning, a loose thread in a much older fabric, a pattern, a repeating thread. Women silenced, stories buried, truths traded for convenience. And now she had a chance to break that cycle. But to do so, she would have to survive long enough to make the world hear that voice. As day broke, Lisa started the car and looked out the window at the icy road. Everything was calm again, too calm. But she knew that kind of calm never came alone. And deep inside, in the distant sound of the wind rushing through the trees, she seemed to hear a faint, almost imperceptible whisper, a sound that said, It's not over yet. Lisa couldn't remember exactly how she'd managed to get back to town. She was driving on. Autopilot, her thoughts whirling like a hurricane. The hiss of the tape still echoed in her ears, mixed with that faint voice begging for help. It was as if Eleanor were there, sitting in the passenger seat, whispering, "Don't leave me here." Each word was accompanied by fleeting images: the dark attic, the locked wall, the chains, the smell of old wood. The tape had changed everything. This was no longer a simple case of domestic violence, but rather something involving power, fear, and a pact of silence that spanned generations. She parked in front of the police station and stood there for a few seconds, her hands firmly on the steering wheel. The air seemed heavier, the world slower. When she finally got out of the car, she noticed unusual activity. 2 government vehicles, their lights flashing discreetly, men in suits at the entrance. Rogers was on the steps, arguing with someone Lisa didn't recognize. When he saw her approach, his look was a mixture of relief and panic. "Lisa, what did you do?" "What I should have done 30 years ago," he replied firmly. Before he could say anything else, one of the men approached. "Detective Warren, I'm Agent Cole from Internal Affairs. I need you to come with me." Lisa crossed her arms. "This has to do with the tape, doesn't it?" "Exactly. It was registered as illegal evidence. You're in possession of classified material." Lisa gave a short, almost incredulous laugh. "Classified? It's a recording of a murder, not a state secret." The man kept his tone cool. "Still, it's part of the investigation, and for your safety we ask that you hand it over now." She looked at Rogers, seeking some semblance of support, but he looked away. "They want to bury this again, don't they?" he said, more to himself than to them. "The whole city built its reputation on lies, and now they're afraid of seeing it all fall apart." The agent stepped forward. "Detective, don't make this any harder. Just hand over the materials." Lisa took a deep breath. Everything in her screamed not to do this, but at the same time she knew she was being cornered. They had the power, the warrants, the contacts. She didn't. Slowly, she opened her backpack and handed over the tape. "But I want a copy of the transcript," she demanded. The agent simply replied, "We'll see what we can do." She knew that meant never. When they left, emptiness took over. Rogers approached, his voice low. "Lisa, sometimes it's better." "Better what, Rogers?" "Pretend it didn't happen. Let them erase it all again. That's what you did before, remember?" He lowered his head. "It's not that simple." "Yes, it is. You're either on the side of the truth or on the side of those who hide it." She turned and left, her body burning with rage and helplessness. He walked aimlessly, his hands shaking, trying to figure out what to do now. Everything he had, all the evidence had been taken, but one thing remained. Margaret, the mysterious woman who had called, who knew more than she was letting on. Hours later, she parked in front of a small motel on the outskirts of town. The receptionist looked at her curiously, but said nothing. Lisa asked for a room, went upstairs, and locked the door. She sat on the bed and stared into space. Exhaustion weighed heavily, but her mind wouldn't stop. The sound of Eleanor's voice still throbbed inside her, mixed with the man's last words in the warehouse. "Listen to the tape, but be prepared to understand what they hid." Suddenly, her phone vibrated. An unknown message, no identification. "She's still alive." Lisa's heart sank. "Who are you?" she typed back. The reply came seconds later. "Margaret wants to see you. Tomorrow, midnight, Old Maple Creek Road." She stared at the screen for a while, trying to process it. Margaret was alive, and maybe she wasn't alone. Something about that time, that place, felt wrong, dangerous, but also inevitable. Lisa knew she couldn't ignore it. She turned off the lights, lay down on the bed and closed her eyes. Her body finally gave in, but her mind remained awake, conjuring images she didn't want to see. A woman trapped in the dark, a man climbing the stairs, a voice begging for help. No one listening. The city slept, but Lisa knew the past was waking up. When the clock struck 3 in the morning, she opened her eyes suddenly, her heart racing. A faint sound came from the window, something like footsteps on snow. She slowly got up, approached, and pulled back the curtain, just a crack. In the parking lot, a shadow moved near her car. Low, quick. Lisa stood still, watching. The figure approached the vehicle, opened the trunk, and within seconds disappeared back into the darkness. She ran there, gun in hand. The cold wind hit her face, and her heart felt like it was about to burst from her chest. When she opened the trunk, she found a manila envelope on the carpet. Inside, a photo. In it, a grey-haired woman sat in a chair, staring straight into the camera. Her face was the same as in old family photos. It was Margaret. But what gave Lisa goosebumps wasn't her face, it was what was written on the back of the photo in red ink. She lied. The detective stood there, the envelope in her hands, feeling the world spin. The chill no longer came from the wind, but from within. If Margaret had lied, what else was wrong with this story? And most importantly, who was truly alive, and who still needed to be found? Because in that moment, Lisa understood that the case wasn't closing. It was, in fact, just beginning, and the next step would take her to a point of no return. Dawn arrived heavy, with the kind of light that doesn't illuminate. It only reveals what was hidden. Lisa didn't sleep for a second. She sat on the edge of the bed holding the photo, watching Margaret's cold gaze, which somehow seemed to stare back. She lied. The words written in red wouldn't leave her head. But what did you lie about? And why? What could Margaret have to hide if she herself had sought out Lisa? It made no sense, and that was precisely why it was so dangerous. Before 7 in the morning, Lisa was back in the car, the envelope tucked into her jacket pocket. The air inside the vehicle was chilly, and the engine was slow to start, as if even the car was hesitant to continue. She turned onto Maple Creek Road, the same one Margaret had mentioned in her message, and was overcome by a strange sensation, the kind of intuition the body understands before the mind. The road was lined with tall, ancient trees, and the fog made everything seem almost unreal. With every turn, doubt grew. Is this a trap? But at the same time, she couldn't stop. She needed answers. As she approached the curve where the road split in two, she saw something that made her slow down. An abandoned car, its window cracked and its left headlight broken. The engine was still lukewarm. Lisa pulled over and got out, the wind biting her face. The other vehicle was an older model and, judging by the license plate, registered to Margaret Lewis. Her heart began to beat faster. "Margaret!" she called, her voice echoing through the fog. No answer, only the distant sound of a twig snapping somewhere in the brush. She opened the car door slowly. On the passenger seat, an open briefcase, scattered papers, and a bottle of water spilled onto the floor. Near the steering wheel, a crumpled note. Lisa picked it up and unfolded it carefully. On it, a hastily written sentence. "They know. How about you?" The handwriting was shaky but recognizable. It was Margaret's. A sense of danger gripped her. Lisa looked around, trying to understand what was happening. No sign of a struggle, no trace of blood, nothing. It was as if Margaret had simply vanished into thin air. Her mind was racing. Who were they? The same men who were on the recording. The ones who tried to cover up the case. And how did they know about her? Lisa took a step back and, for a second, thought she saw movement among the trees. A figure, maybe a person, maybe just the wind. But deep down, something told her she wasn't alone. She quickly got back into the car, locked the doors, and started the engine. She had to get out of there. On the way back, her mind was a whirlwind. The tape, the diary, the photos, Margaret, the mysterious man from the shed. Each piece seemed to make sense on its own, but together they formed something bigger, something she couldn't yet fully see. And, as if fate wanted to push her into the abyss, her phone vibrated again. A message from an unknown number. "You found the note, that's good, now listen." Her body froze. Then another message arrived, accompanied by audio. Lisa hesitated for a moment, then pressed play. The voice that came through the speaker was hoarse, tired, and unmistakable. It was Margaret. "Lisa, if you're hearing this, it means they found me. I tried to warn you. The tape you found, it's not the only one. There's another. And on it is the reason for everything, the reason Eleanor was silenced." The recording paused for a second, and the sound of heavy breathing came before Margaret continued. "Look in the old church. In the confessional. He kept it there. But be careful. Wallace wasn't the only one with blood on his hands." Lisa felt goosebumps run down her spine. The church, the confessional, a place no one would investigate, precisely because it was sacred, and if the tape was really there, it meant the secret wasn't just Harold and Wallace's. Someone else was involved, someone who was still alive. Without a second thought, she turned the car around and sped toward St. Agnes's Church, an old, isolated building perched on the highest hill in town. As she climbed, the wind picked up, making the branches rattle like bones. The bell, old and rusty, swayed gently in the wind, emitting a low, almost funereal sound. The front door was ajar. Lisa entered, and the smell of wood and aged incense filled the air. The tinted windows let in light in reds and golds, painting the floor with patches of color. Everything was too quiet. She walked slowly to the back, where the confessional was. The floorboards creaked under her footsteps. When she opened the small side door, the darkness inside seemed alive. He aimed the flashlight. On the floor, a wooden box. He knelt, carefully opened it, and inside found a ribbon identical to the previous one. On the label, the date, January 1994. Beside it, an envelope. Inside, a black and white photo of Harold and Wallace, but there was a third person in the image, a priest, the same one who, according to records, would have officiated at Harold's funeral years later. Lisa stood frozen for a moment, staring at the photo. There was something familiar about the priest's face, and suddenly the weight of the revelation fell upon her. This was the same man who, just a few months earlier, had given an interview to local television lamenting the suffering of the city and saying that evil was in the past. Evil was never in the past, she thought. He'd just changed his clothes. Her heart raced. She grabbed the tape, pocketed it, and started to leave. But before she reached the door, a soft voice echoed from the altar. "Looking for something, Detective Warren?" Lisa turned quickly, the flashlight trembling in her hand. There he was, the priest, dressed in black, standing in the colored light from the windows. The same look from the photo, the same controlled smile. "I was waiting for you." For a second, the world seemed to stop. Lisa took a deep breath, her hand steady on the gun, her eyes never leaving his. "So it's true," she said, her voice firm but low. "You were with them." The priest stepped forward, his tone too calm for the situation. "I wasn't with them, my daughter, they." And in that moment, Lisa understood she was facing something much bigger than she had imagined. The tape in her pocket wasn't just evidence. It was the key to a secret many people had killed to keep hidden, and the feeling that every step from then on could be her last washed over her, like a cold that started inside and never ended. Lisa felt her entire body freeze, as if the air around her had thickened. The priest was there, standing in the colored light streaming through the church windows, and the contrast between the calm tone of his voice and the weight of what he was saying made everything even more unsettling. The flashlight trembled in her hand, and for a moment she felt as if everything she had experienced in the past few weeks, the house, the tape, Margaret, the figures, had led her to this very point. It was as if fate had closed all the exits, pushing her straight into the center of what she was trying to unearth. "You knew everything from the beginning, didn't you?" he asked, trying to control his breathing. The priest smiled slightly, the kind of smile that hides more than it reveals. "No, that's a strong word, Detective. I just took care of what needed to be taken care of. Sometimes protecting a community means bearing sins others wouldn't bear." Lisa's jaw clenched. "Sins? You're talking about a woman who was locked away alive, tortured, forgotten. That's not a sin. It's a monstrosity." He inclined his head, almost as if in regret. "You see the world in such a linear way, right and wrong, guilty and innocent. But that's not always how things work, especially in a small town. There are names, families, stories that need to remain intact. Eleanor's was a mistake that needed to be silenced." His calm, fatherly tone made something inside her snap. Lisa stepped forward, her voice now thick with anger. "And you think justifying horror makes it less dirty? She was a woman, not a mistake." The priest sighed and looked around the church as if the place itself were watching. "She threatened to destroy everything. She doesn't understand what Harold did. He believed he was saving, not killing. And Wallace just followed orders. Their world was different. I just confessed." "You confessed?" Lisa repeated in disbelief. "You blessed murderers." The priest approached slowly, his footsteps echoing on the hardwood floor. "No, Detective, I blessed silence, because silence is what maintains order." For a moment, the two stood face to face, so close that Lisa could smell the incense mingling with the ancient perfume of his cassock. And it was in that exact moment that she realized he wasn't afraid. Not at all. His look wasn't one of guilt, it was one of control. He was there because he wanted to be. "The tape," she said firmly. "What's on it?" The priest lowered his eyes for a second and, with eerie calm, replied, "Everything. And nothing the world is ready to hear." Lisa took the recorder out of her pocket and showed it to him. "Then let's find out together." The priest nodded slightly, and the sound of footsteps behind her made her turn. Two men, dressed in black, stood at the church entrance. One of them, tall and square-faced, held something under his coat. The other locked the door. The sound of the iron locking its lock echoed through the hall, cutting through the air. She raised her gun, pointing it at the group. "You're going to let me out of here now?" The priest raised his hands theatrically and replied, "There's no need for violence. We just want what belongs to us. This tape. It's not yours, never was. It's a burden, detective. A burden that's about to destroy you." Lisa kept her aim steady. "If you were going to scare me, you'll have to do better." One of the men stepped forward, and Lisa threw it to the ground. The deafening sound echoed through the empty space, scaring even the pigeons on the roof. "One more step and the next one won't miss," he warned. The priest, still calm, stepped closer. "You know what strikes me, detective? How much you look like her." Lisa frowned. "Like Eleanor. Women who believe too much in the truth, who think they can save the world, and in the end the world swallows them up." His tone was almost pitying. Lisa felt her anger rise. "The difference is, I won't disappear, and you will answer for what you did." Before he could react, she took a quick step aside and ran toward the sacristy's side exit. One of the men tried to grab her, but she elbowed him, knocking him to the ground. The second man pulled something from his coat, but she had already crossed the aisle, knocking over benches and candlesticks in her wake. The side door gave way with a bang, and the cold morning wind rushed into the hallway. Outside, Lisa ran across the churchyard, slipping in the mud and snow. The bell rang suddenly, shattering the silence, the sound echoing like a metallic scream. With each step, she felt the weight of the recorder in her pocket, the proof, the reason for it all, the peace everyone wanted, and the one she swore to protect. Behind her, the men's shouts mingled with the sound of the wind. "Get her!" She reached the car, unlocked it with trembling hands and got in, pulling away so hard the rear tire skidded. In the rearview mirror, she saw the church growing smaller, the priest standing on the steps, motionless, watching. He didn't run, didn't shout. He just stood there watching with that same serene smile, the kind of smile that promises it's not over yet. As she walked down the road back to town, Lisa tried to control her breathing. The tape was still with her, the second, recording, and inside it, the confession that could finally reveal what really happened to Eleanor Madsen and why so many people died trying to hide it. But something inside her told her this truth would come with a price. And maybe deep down, that was what the priest meant when he called the tape a burden. The car drove on through the fog, the sound of the engine mixing with her own heartbeat, and without realizing it, Lisa whispered softly, as if speaking to someone who wasn't there. "I'll tell your story, Eleanor, whatever it takes." But deep down, a part of her knew what was recorded on that tape wasn't just a confession. It was the beginning of something much bigger, something that was still alive, hidden somewhere, waiting to be heard. The road seemed endless. Lisa drove on, her gaze fixed on nothing, her mind trying to keep up with her own heartbeat. The steering wheel trembled beneath her hands, and the cold seeped through the cracks in the car, but she barely felt. All that mattered was the tape, the second recording. Margaret's voice still echoed in her head, telling her that here was the real reason, why Eleanor had been silenced. And now, after the confrontation in the church, Lisa knew that secret was too big to be kept just inside a confessional. She only stopped when she saw the Pine Brook Motel sign on the side of the road. It was an old, forgotten place, the kind where no one asks questions. He parked the car, looked around, and quickly entered the room. The heavy curtains blocked the light, and the smell was of mildew and stale cigarettes, but it was safe enough for what he needed to do. He took the recorder from his pocket, placed it on the table, and sat on the bed. The silence was so profound that the click of the play button seemed to echo. The hiss came first, the same metallic sound from the previous tape. Then a voice, masculine, hoarse. It was Wallace. This shouldn't have happened. He crossed the line. Harold's voice came. Next, nervous, desperate. She wouldn't stop screaming. I tried, Father, I swear I tried. The sound of footsteps, of creaking wood, and then the priest's voice. Calm, cold. Silence is the only path to salvation. Pause. More hiss. What about her sister? She knows too much too, it's settled. Lisa clapped her hand over her mouth. That confirmed everything. Margaret never ran away. She was killed, and probably by the same group that held Eleanor prisoner. Anger rose like fire. Damn them, she whispered. But the tape wasn't over yet. The hissing grew louder, then came a different voice, feminine, faint, almost imperceptible. Please, someone find me. It was Eleanor, crying, breathing hard. They said they were doing this for God, but God doesn't live here. The sound of a muffled blow, then silence. Lisa paused the recorder, her hands shaking. That recording was hell in audio form. She couldn't believe that for 30 years, everyone knew, and chose not to listen. She picked up her cell phone and dialed the only number she still trusted, Rogers. I have the proof, she said as soon as he answered. I heard everything. Wallace, Harold, the priest, all involved. And they killed Margaret. The captain's voice sounded tired, broken. Lisa, where are you? In a motel down the road. I need to get this to the press, to someone who can publicize it before they take it all away. Silence. Then Rogers spoke softly. Don't do this alone. Wait for me, I'm coming. His tone held. Something strange, a mix of urgency and guilt. Lisa hesitated. Part of her wanted to trust him, part of her knew it might be a mistake, but she was too exhausted to think straight. Okay, but if you're not here within the hour, I'm leaving here with this tape, straight to the TV. She hung up and stared at the recorder on the table. The tape still played slowly, the background sound reminiscent of breathing, a noise that sounded almost alive. The clock read 7:32 p.m. The sky outside was already dark. Each minute seemed to drag by. 40 minutes later, she heard the sound of a car approaching. She peeked through the crack in the curtain and saw the headlights slowly approaching. It was Rogers. She recognized the car, but something was wrong. He didn't get out immediately. He stayed inside for a few seconds, headlights still on. Lisa felt her stomach tighten. She grabbed her gun and the recorder, took a deep breath, and opened the door. Rogers, she called, trying to keep her voice steady. The captain got out of the car. His face looked aged, his eyes weary. Lisa, they already know. They're coming for you. Who, Rogers? The priest? More people. People from above. The kind who erase what needs to be erased. He stepped closer, but she didn't lower her gun. You knew Margaret was dead, didn't you? He was silent, and that silence said it all. Lisa felt her heart sink. Oh my God, you were involved too. He took a step, raising his hands. It wasn't like that. I tried to stop it, I swear. When it all happened, I was just a rookie. They said it was to protect the city, to avoid a scandal. I kept quiet. And now they want you to do the same. What if I don't? She asked. Rogers's gaze filled with sadness. Then they'll bury you with her. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. The distant sound of a truck passed on the road. Lisa held her gun steady. Did you come here to help me, or to silence me, Rogers? He sighed. To try to save you. She shook her head slowly. There's no saving you, not after this. It was at that moment that the headlights of another car illuminated the scene. Lisa looked quickly, blinded by the light. A black SUV pulled up alongside, the doors opened, and two armed men got out. Rogers turned, startled. Damn, they got here first. Lisa ran back to her room, locking the door. The sound of footsteps outside echoed in the hallway. One of them shouted, "Hand over the tape and no one gets hurt." She grabbed the recorder and ran to the bathroom, opening the narrow window. The cold wind blew in. She put the recorder in a plastic bag, secured it with tape, and threw it outside, where it landed on the roof of a parked car. The next moment, the bedroom door was kicked in. Lisa turned, gun drawn. Rogers was there, between her and the men. "Run!" he yelled. The shots rang out. 1, 2, 3. The deafening sound filled everything. Lisa fell to the ground, feeling the impact, but she couldn't tell where the shot came. "From?" Rogers shouted something, and the window shattered. She crawled to the window, the sound of footsteps approaching, warm blood running down her arm. She managed to climb out of the opening and fall out the other side, hitting the icy ground. Her body ached, but she was still breathing. She looked up and saw one of the men on the railing pointing his gun at her. Before he could fire, Rogers appeared and pushed the man away, screaming. The shot hit the ceiling, and within seconds, the motel was filled with screams and smoke. Lisa limping to her feet and ran to the nearest car. On the roof, the recorder was still there. She grabbed it with her bloodied hands and got into the car, speeding off. In the rearview mirror, flames began to rise in the room, and for a brief moment she thought she saw Rogers standing between the fire and the darkness, looking at her one last time before everything disappeared. The road ahead was empty, the sky filled with heavy clouds. Lisa was breathing heavily, blood trickling down her shoulder. She clutched the recorder to her chest. They can kill us all, she thought, but they won't kill the truth. And as the car disappeared into the night, she knew it wasn't over yet. The tape still needed to be heard, and someone still needed to pay for everything they'd done. The road wound through the snow-covered hills, and the sky was beginning to lighten. Dawn, normally a symbol of peace, seemed only to expose the remnants of a night of horror. Lisa drove with her body wounded and her mind in turmoil. The recorder clutched to her chest as if it were her own heart beating there. The dried blood on her coat, the pain in her shoulder, her shallow breath, all were background noise compared to the weight she carried. She had no one left, no support, no structure. But she had the truth, and that, painful as it was already more than anyone before her had ever known. Memories came to her like flashes, pieces of a macabre puzzle. The look in Rogers's eyes before he fell, the fire engulfing the motel, the sound of the tape echoing in her mind. Silence is the only path to salvation. The priest's words seemed to mock her, repeating themselves at every turn, every shadow on the road. For a moment she considered stopping, abandoning everything. But when she looked in the mirror, she saw her own face, dirty, bruised, exhausted, and remembered why she was there. For Eleanor, for Margaret, for all the voices silenced because someone decided the truth was inconvenient. When she finally reached the town entrance, the world seemed different. The same Maple Hollow as always, but strangely muted. People walked leisurely, businesses opened, life went on. It was as if no one had any idea of the hell hidden beneath the frozen ground. Lisa parked her car in front of the old local radio station, one of the few still broadcasting news from the area. She knew that if she could get that recording heard, not even the powers that be would be able to erase it again. He limped in, his coat hiding his wound. The receptionist looked up, startled. "Can I help you?" Lisa flashed her badge, even though she no longer had official authority. "I need a microphone, now. It's about the Madsen case." The name was enough to make the air heavy. The older clerk, a man with a grey beard, appeared behind the counter. You mean that one case? The missing woman?" She nodded firmly. The woman who was silenced. Minutes later she was sitting in front of the microphone, headphones on, the recorder plugged into the table. The hissing sound filled the studio. For a moment, she hesitated. Her hands trembled. This could end her life, but at the same time, it was the only way to give a voice to those who had never had the chance to speak. "Let's start," she said, pressing the red record button. The tape rolled, and the confession echoed again. The voices of Harold, Wallace, and the priest overlapped, creating a grotesque chorus. Each word exposed the rot behind the quiet town facade. "She knew too much," Wallace said. "The priest will take care of the rest." And then, again, Eleanor's voice. "Weak, human, real. Please, someone tell my story." Lisa closed her eyes and let the tears fall. The risk didn't matter anymore. This needed to be heard. When she finished, she turned off the recorder and took a deep breath. The radio host stared at her silently, his face pale. "My God, this changes everything." Lisa struggled to her feet. "Then do what needs to be done. Put it on the air." He hesitated for a second, but seeing her gaze, steady, determined, he simply nodded. As she left the radio station, the first sunlight broke through the clouds, illuminating the street. For the first time in weeks, Lisa felt something close to relief. It wasn't happiness, but it was lightness. The feeling that, even if justice hadn't yet come, the silence had finally been broken. She walked to her car and stood there for a moment, watching the people pass by, unaware that within minutes, The entire city would hear the truth she risked her life to reveal. But before he could start the engine, his cell phone vibrated. An anonymous message. Just 3 words. Not everything is over. The chill crept up his spine again. He looked around but saw no one, and in that instant he understood that the truth came at a price, and that perhaps the story of Maple Hollow still had chapters no one was ready to hear. Lisa started. The car speeding away down the snow-covered road. The radio's hiss was replaced by a female voice trembling with emotion, Eleanor's voice coming from the speakers, echoing throughout the city. "Please, someone find me." And for the first time in 30 years, Maple Hollow listened. Now that you've made it this far, you've realized how stories like Eleanor's make us see the world differently. During these few minutes, you've delved into a real mystery, full of secrets, hidden truths, and emotions that you may have felt as your own. That's what makes this space so special. Here, each story helps you understand the deeper side of fear, courage, and truth. And that's precisely why this video was worth your time. It made you feel, think, and remember that not all silence is peace. Now, what started here can reach even more people. A simple like and your subscription keep this kind of story being told. Stories that won't let oblivion win. And to show that you're part of this group that goes all the way, leave a comment below. True, because that's what this is all about. And before you leave, check out the next video on the screen. It features an even more mysterious case with revelations that will completely change the way you think about what it means to disappear. Did you think this story was intense? Wait until you see what comes next.